Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at HTML, and this video is part of a larger series of videos focusing on the introduction to HTML and CSS. This video assumes that you've already been working a little bit with HTML and have looked at some of the earlier videos focusing on how to use a IDE and the workflow associated with editing and updating an HTML file and then ultimately representing it or presenting it then in a web browser. This video is going to focus mainly on the I tag and some similar tags that can be used to identify text in a paragraph. Now, I'm being rather vague in how I'm describing this because what I want us to do is I want us to get convinced that the idea of how a particular piece of text is presented versus how it is structured are two different things. And so the first thing that you might assume is that the I tag represents italic text. And the answer is, well, yes, that is how it is typically displayed. Much like some of the other tags we're going to look at, it does have a default behavior. In other words, basically that is how it was chosen to be rendered in the browser. However, what we want to do is we sort of want to disconnect the idea of the I tag being used to present or style a piece of text. Rather, it should be used to identify a piece of text as being something unique. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the default behavior of several of the tags. In addition to the I tag, we're also going to look at the EM tag, the strong tag, and the mark tag. And then at the end of the video, we're going to take a look at a couple of other tags that can be used again to structure your document. You want to be discouraged from thinking of it as styling the document. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on when we start looking at our style sheets. The other thing that's going to be a little bit different in this video is we are going to shift away from creating the HTML file in the video. And again, I'm going to assume that you have your workflow set up, whether it's in Visual Studio, NetBeans, Visual Studio Code, or whatever other tool that you're using, and that you're comfortable creating essentially this blank document. These tags that I showed you earlier, the I tag in its similarly styled or rather similarly related tags, all will be used inside of a P tag, which ultimately gets used inside of the body. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and create a P tag. And again, it's going to be for a paragraph. And I'm going to have multiple sentences in here. So we'll go ahead and put this on multiple lines. And I want to start off by first displaying some text in essentially what is the normal format. In other words, what we're going to do is we're simply going to put a sentence in here. This is a sample sentence in normal text. And I guess we can emphasize this a little bit further by saying there is, in fact, no additional tags other than the P tag. And I'm going to follow this up with our BR tag. And again, remember from the earlier video that that is our line break. And also the Visual Studio goes ahead and adds the space and the slash, which is technically not needed. And so at this point, let's go ahead and save our sample_03. And much like in the earlier videos, I've created a subfolder, and in that subfolder resides our sample_03. And you can see here that I can easily display this in the web browser, as well as being able to split the view in Visual Studio. And again, I'm using Visual Studio. What tool you're using doesn't really matter so much, as long as you can display the HTML tag. Now, what we want to do is we want to come back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this text, except I'm going to modify it just a little bit, and that this is going to be a sample sentence using then one of our tags. And so we're going to start off with using the I tag. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and isolate a certain portion of this text with an I, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the end of the sentence. Whether you include the period or not is not really important, but we want to essentially now distinguish between what is normal text and then what is ultimately the text that is inside of the I tag. Now, keep in mind now, we should be thinking this as structure, not as how it is represented or presented. However, though, the browser is going to present this by default in italics. And what we're going to see with the other tags is each of them have some default behavior. And so let's go through a few more real quick. Again, as I mentioned when we first started this video, what we'd like to do is we'd like to focus on these first four here, the I tag, the EM, the strong, and the mark, and then we'll come back to the other tags. And again, the idea is that we can sort of get a basic understanding of how this works. So what we'll do is we'll simply make a few more copies of this. I'm going to start off each of these with roughly about the same text, so probably worth copying and pasting. And what we will do now is we'll look at the EM tag. So again, I'm going to keep this pretty similar so that you have something to work with later on, and that this will be using the EM tag. And again, whether you include the period inside or not doesn't really matter too much. And then again, there is going to be our BR tag, and whether you decide to include that or not doesn't really matter. So continuing this, let's do all of them, or the ones that we're interested in. We're going to do the EM, then we're going to do the strong. Again, this is going to be using the strong tag, and keep the pattern consistent, followed up with a BR. I probably should go through and figure out how to get Visual Studio to stop completing the BR tag that way. But our last one then we have is their EM, strong, and then lastly our mark. And so using the mark tag. And so now what we have is a little bit of a demonstration of all four of these together, including our normal text. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's go ahead and come out again back to our browser. We can simply just reload the earlier one. And you can see here, it's pretty straightforward that the EM tag, again, has a similar representation to the I tag. We can look at the documentation there, but again, they have a different purpose. The idea is that you're supposed to structure your data. Ultimately, it can be parsed differently. It can be styled differently. Again, topics that we will take a look at later on, but they do come with a default styling. And you can see here that the strong tag essentially is bold, and then the mark tag is essentially highlighting. Now, if we come back over here to the HTML documentation on the W3 Schools, we should take just a second to go ahead and look at the site and then also the DFN tags. And this is another feature that is very convenient with the W3 Schools, including their alphabetic representation of the tags and the attributes, is you can actually quickly try out one of the tags without having to set up one of the examples that we have been doing in the earlier videos. And again, sometimes these videos will focus on multiple tags and you can sort of compare the behavior. So this is not a complete substitute for following along with videos, but instead it's just meant to be an augmentation. But in this case, let's go ahead and take a look at the try it yourself feature, and you can see the HTML with a little bit of style mixed in. Actually, let me retract that. On this particular example, there is no style, but in later examples, we will see that they include some style. For right now, we're just focusing in on the tags and the attributes. But in particular, what we're interested in is the site tag inside of the P tag. And you'll notice that, again, effectively, it's represented as italics. And it is also, again, separate from the rest of the normal text. So in other words, you can highlight or identify a certain portion of text inside of a P tag, a certain portion of text inside of a paragraph, and essentially it will be styled perhaps to the default style of the web browser. But what we can see later on is when we do have control over our style, that it helps us identify individual tags as well. And then again, one last example real quick is the DFN tag. And we can take a quick look at that. And again, we can use the try it your self feature, and you can see that again, you can notice the similar styling. And again, that's the default behavior for these tags, but that is again, not the real purpose behind these tags. The site and the DFN tags both can be used ultimately in styling later, but also can be used to parse or identify features within your HTML content in a more automated fashion. So again, let's go back to our source real quick. You could see the advantage of sort of comparing multiple examples together, whether you do these in separate files or you do them all in one large file is kind of completely up to you. Ultimately, you would want to use certain features in different pages depending on what you're trying to accomplish. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for watching.